All right, this is September 6th. We are looking at the thing we turned in last time for homework, which was Chapter 2, Case Problem Level 1, which begins on page 147, and the bulk of what we do actually, or the directions, are on 148. So we're going to do the first part, which is to figure the sales by flavor in gallons. So on page 148, we're going to open the workbook named Cream, and there it is, Cream. And it says rename it as. I'm not going to do that because I've already got the solution file named that, so I'll just leave it like this. And I guess I'll save it as Mesco. And I'll just save it on the desktop as Mesco this. All right. Number 2, it says on the flavors worksheet, here we are, for the current quarter, which is column D, it looks like, calculate the total number of gallons sold for each flavor. So here are the different flavors, and it says here's the pints sold, here's the gallon containers, and here's the tubs used. And on the previous page it said to round down to the nearest gallon on those tubs. Okay, so let us look at, it says place this calculation. Notice the typographical error in the second sentence, or first sentence at the end. Gallons sold for each flavor, that should be flavor in the textbook. Place this calculation in the column adjacent to the data provided. So we're in column E. It says above the list of flavors, in a separate area, list and clearly label the conversion values. Those conversion values, I'm going to add a couple of extra rows above here, 3 extra rows in fact. And the conversion factors are on page 147, 8 pints per gallon. So it's 8 pints and gallons. 8 pints equals, I guess let's do it this way. 8 pints per gallon is 8. And it says each tub holds 10 gallons. So this would be gallons per tub, wouldn't it? Gallons per tub is 10. Okay, how does that feel so far? Just our conversion factors, because they want us to figure out the total number of gallons. So here's pints, here's gallons, and here's bunches of 10-gallon tubs. Okay, so that's a lot of gallons of ice cream. All right, and this should be calculate the total number of gallons sold for each flavor. So this is number of gallons sold current quarter. And I'm going to center that. I kind of like the way that looks a little bit better. All right, now notice we've got, here's pint containers. We want gallons, so we're going to want to divide that by 8, aren't we? Yes. So I'm going to say equals this thing, the number of pints, divided by 8. And then I'm going to add that to this number, right? Because that's just straight gallons. And then I'm going to add that to this number times 10, except they want us to round that down before we multiply it by 10, because we didn't sell a whole tub here, and they're just saying, let's look back at 147. It says right under the two conversion factors, the two bullet points in the middle of the page, when calculating values for 10-gallon tubs, use the convention of rounding down the values to the nearest whole tub. That's before we multiply it by 10. Okay, so how would we round this thing down? We could say round down, or we could say we could take the integer function, which just throws away the decimal part. We will use the round down function, and really we shouldn't use the number 8 here. We should refer to this cell. So I'm going to take out the 8, and I'm going to refer to this and make it absolute reference by pressing F4, function 4 key. And so now we say take whatever that pint containers is and divide it by whatever's in B2. We want to leave the pint containers relative so it'll change when we copy it down. Then we're just going to take this as is, and now we're going to round down. It rounds a number down toward 0. We'll take that D5, round it down, and then we want it to 0 digits, right? I don't know that we even need that. It might be optional, but I'll put 0 digits there. And then we would want that times 10, wouldn't we? But we're going to refer to this cell and make it absolute. Now we could have used a sum function and put commas between these things instead of plus signs. So here's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be, let's do the same thing but use the sum function just for grins. Equals sum. You don't have to do this, but we'd want to say take this thing divided by that, absolute. And remember, with a function we separate the different things with commas, and then we'd want this number, and then we would want the round down of this thing, and I'm not going to put the 0 there and see what happens. I think it assumes 0 unless we put something else there, times 10 absolute. And then we close the parens, and it says no, you actually do need to have a number of digits. So I'm going to put the 0 digits to round it to the nearest whole number. Now, I'm asking why did we get a decimal here? That's because our pints are not a multiple of 8, right? Okay. Now we could do this by hand to make sure we're in the right ballpark. If this were 160,000 divided by 8, that would be 20,000 gallons. Plus about 7,000, that's 27,000. Plus about 1,200, that's 39,000. So we're in the right ballpark. If this said 136,000 or if it said 3,000, we'd say, we got our formula wrong. But I think that is the correct formula. All right, so we've done that calculation. Now we're going to copy that formula down. And those are our calculations for the gallons sold in the current quarter. Number 3 says, add another column in which to enter the total number of gallons from last year. So this would be total number of gallons from last year. And it says, copy the values for the total amount of ice cream sold from last year from the H cream into the chapter 2 into the newly added column of the flavors worksheet. Okay, so gallons sold last year, I'm going to look in that H cream, and here's the gallons sold last year. Now, do these line up the same way? Let's copy the name of it as well and make sure it lines up. They don't say to do that, but I will make sure that they line up, and I'll show you a quick way to do that. Oh, wrong one. Mesco cream is what we want. So if I paste these, now it shows the name of it and the gallons, and this is small enough that we can look and see if they're the same, but I always like to do it with a formula because I don't trust my eyes. And what if there were 10,000 of these? I sure do not want to have to do that by hand. So what I would do is I would put a formula over here, and I'd say if this thing is the same as that thing, if it's the same, then show me nothing, quote, quote, nothing in between. Otherwise, show me different. They're not the same. And so I copy the formula down, and there should be nothing there. Ah, there's something that's different. Marshmallow fudge is different. Raspberry is different. Chocolate fudge and cherry vanilla are different. So let's look and see why. Ah, check it out. They misspelled marshmallow here. It's M-A. It's not M-E. And here's, they left the P out of raspberry. Now these are the new flavors, so they weren't even there last year. Okay? So we can look at that as human beings and say, we know that this is supposed to be the same as that, and this is supposed to be the same as that. But that lets us know that there's misspellings in that last year's spreadsheet. Okay? So we don't need these names, so I'm not going to bother correcting the spellings, but you see how doing that formula is much better, much safer, because we caught those errors in our data. Somebody typed this in by hand and misspelled it. That should be picked from a drop-down list. Now that I know that those flavors do line up in the right order, even though we have a misspelling here and here in last year's list, now I'm going to copy just the gallon amounts, and I'm going to put them in my spreadsheet, and we know that they will line up. So that's gallons from last year. So that these will stand out more, I'm going to highlight our conversion factors. I'm going to delete the third row, and I'm going to freeze the top row. And so I can see those when I scroll down. Now they want us to total the gallons this year and the gallons last year, and to get the mean, the average for those numbers of gallons. So I'm going to say total and mean, and the total, what function would we use? We would use the sum function, and we would want everything from here up. I'm Control Shift arrow up and then Shift arrow down to get rid of that gallons thing, and that should give me the total number from this year. Now I do want that to be relative, don't I? When I copy it to the right, I want it to move to the right, so I don't want any absolute references. I copy it to the right, and last year means I need this bigger because I can't hit that fill box. Too small a target. There's our formula from last year, and that's the number of gallons. Now probably they don't want to see decimal points on gallons, so I'm just going to format these with no decimal places. And now we want to do the mean, which would just be the average, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Because the directions specifically said make your formulas as efficient as possible, this E4 to E24, I want the column to move, but I don't want the row to move. But when I copy it down, I want everything to stay the same. So I can see it both ways. I am going to make this absolute for this column and make this absolute for this column. And now I can copy both of these down and just change the name of the function. Again, it depends on which way you're going to copy it and how many times you're going to copy it. And this would be the average function, wouldn't it? I think we're ready for number 5, which is page 148. It says calculate for each flavor the percent of total gallons this flavor represents compared with total sales for the current quarter. In other words, here's vanilla. Here's their total sales in gallons. How does that compare to the whole total for the quarter? In other words, if this were 10 gallons and the whole sale were 100, we'd say, how big is 10 compared to 100? And compared to means divided by. So we're going to take each individual sale and divide it by the total and express that as a percent. So my formula will be equals this thing, and when I copy it down, I want it to move down, divided by the total sales for that quarter, which is here, but I don't want that to move, so that's going to be absolute, isn't it? Okay, so now we have this thing, vanilla, divided by the total, and that will give me a decimal. I'm going to have to look at more decimal points. So if I change that to a percent, to the nearest whole percent, it's 8%. If I added more decimal places, I could see more of that. But let's just do it to the nearest whole percent. So this is percent. I'm going to move this guy over. Too much. These things change when you change your resolution, your view, your zoom. So this would be percent flavor percent of this year's sales. That's not going to fit probably. We'll make it smaller. There we go. Flavor percent of this year's sales. I'll copy that down, and notice where there were no sales, that's 0%. And these things will not, if we looked at all those integers, it wouldn't add up to 100, possibly, because we're just formatting them to look that way. Now, if I copy this cell and paste it here, this would be last year's sales. In other words, this year, vanilla sold 8% of the sales, but last year it accounted for 11% of the sales, which is this thing divided by last year's total. Whoops. You see what happened? Because I put absolute reference on that, it took this and divided it by this year's. We don't want that. So I need to change my formula so that it moves over to the right. So I want that absolute row, but I want the column to move. So right here, I'm going to start back again, and I'm going to say this thing, why is it not showing me the formula? Because I was clicking the wrong cell. It says divide this by E26, but when you move it over here, we'll want it to be F26. So we'll take this off of here. And now when we copy it over, these numbers will stay the same. But when I copy it over, now it says take that and divide it by F26. Okay, so that's always good to check. Double click on it and it shows you which cells it's referring to, and that way we can make sure we get it right. So notice vanilla was much more popular last year, probably because they added some new flavors this year and it took some of the sales away from vanilla, but I don't know that for sure. So here are the percentages of last year's sales, and of course they didn't sell any of these two new flavors last year. We didn't even have these flavors, and nobody bought any cinnamon spice either year. I'd say we ought to quit making that. Although we'd have to look at the others. This is just for one particular quarter. Maybe in maybe in the summer nobody likes cinnamon spice, but when the weather's colder, they say, oh, that's kind of like hot cider or something. Number 6 says, in the 2 adjacent columns, calculate for each flavor and for the totals the difference and percent difference in sales from last year to this year. Assume a positive value represents an increase in sales. Flavors without sales in the previous year should be left blank. The reason for that is that if you don't do that, you'd be dividing by 0 and you'd get an error. Yeah. So here's how percent change works. I'm going to go off to the right here and do a little bit of a teaching tutorial on percent difference. There's always an old thing. There's always a new thing. And then there's an actual change or an actual difference. And the actual difference is always found by taking the new minus the old. So if we want to find the actual difference, we always say take the new minus the old. The reason for that is if we gained, if the new number is bigger than the old, when we subtract, we'll get a positive number here. We'll get a positive percent increase, and we'll know that that was an increase. If it went down, we'll get a negative number here, and our percent will be negative. We'll know that was a percent decrease. So if I had, if it used to be 100 and now it's 130, then I'd say how much did it actually change? Well, it would be the new thing minus the old thing. That's how much it actually changed. And we say, is that a lot or not? Yes, compared to what? So the percent change, we'd say 30 compared to what it used to be. So the percent change is always the actual change divided by what it used to be. Okay. And we would express that as a percentage, and it went up 30%. Okay. If this was 50, now it went up 160%. It's more than double what it used to be. Now, I'll put the formula up here. Percent change is actually That is the actual change compared to divided by what it used to be. So let's do it the other way. What if it used to be 130 and now it went down to 100? Well, if I copy these formulas down, it went down 30, but it didn't go down 30%, because 30 compared to what it used to be 130. So now we've got 30 divided by 130, which is a smaller percentage. So it went up 30%, then it went down 23%, and that took it right back to where it was before. That's something to remember about percent change. When 100 goes up to 130, that's a 30% increase. But when 130 goes down to 100, that's only a 23% decrease. In other words, those percentages aren't the same if you're going different directions. Now that we have a better understanding, or maybe have refreshed our understanding of how percent change works, we want to find the actual difference from last year's sales to this year's sales. So if we scroll over to the left, here's last year and here's this year, which is a little bit odd to have. Normally you've got earlier things to the left and later things to the right, like a timeline. So the actual difference is always the new thing, which is this year, minus the old thing. And when we do that, we see that our number of gallons dropped from last year to this year. And we say, what kind of percent difference is that? Well, here's the actual difference. Is that a lot of drop or not? Well, compared to what? Compared to what it used to be, and compared to means divided by. So we are always going to say, give me this thing to the left and divide it by, divide by what it used to be, which is this thing. So 18,000 divided by what it used to be, that's about 1/3, isn't it? 3/18 would be 54. So that's almost exactly 1/3. And let's do it to the nearest whole percent. So we'll do it as a percent, and it does it to the whole one. So our ice cream sales went down by 1/3 as a percentage. And now we can copy these two formulas down. This time, what was that, chocolate over there? Let's make sure we can see the flavor here. So vanilla went down, but chocolate, we can see that it went up from 76 to 102, and that was a 34% increase. This one went up a little bit, and that's the beauty of doing these things in the right direction, so that a positive number represents an increase. Notice they gave us the directions and said if you didn't have any sales last year, leave it blank, because otherwise you're comparing something against last year and you're dividing by 0, and that's why we got that error. So it looks like we need to fix our formula to say if we get an error, don't put anything there. Okay, I think it says leave it blank, doesn't it? Yeah. Flavors without sales in the previous year, number 6. These should be completely empty. So I'm going to modify my formula and say there's an if error function, and it says this is the value I want as long as there's no error. That's what I want here, is this thing divided by that. But my second argument is, what if this thing produces an error? Then what do you want me to put here? Just put quote, quote, nothing. That's what's called a null string. And so now it's not going to affect any of these because they didn't have an error. But the ones that produced an error, now they're blank because they didn't have any sales last year. So that's a really cool trick to get rid of your errors. Here's one more trick where you can get the percent difference all at once, and it's very easy to do. You take the new thing and divide it by the old thing, and notice that's going to give us what percent this year was of last year, and then you subtract 1 from that. So if it was a negative, if it went down, you're going to get a negative there. If it went up, you're going to get a positive. It'll subtract 100% from it. So you simply take the new thing, I'll put that up here, it's new divided by old minus 1, and 1 is 100%, of course. So it's new divided by old minus 1, and that gets you the percent change very quickly and easily if you don't need to see the actual dollar difference. So I'm going to change that here, and these should be identical, except we'll still have our errors with the division by 0. But I could put that if error there. Okay. Oh, by the way, they wanted us to do the totals as well. So here's our formulas. We had a positive increase in our total gallons. We sold 10% more gallons this year than last year in the same quarter. So I guess that's a good sign. Notice on page 148 the troubleshooting thing. If we tried to do this as new minus old, which is right here, and then divided by old, we'd have to make sure we have the order of preference. If we said new minus old divided by old, it's going to do that division first, and we don't want that. We want it to do the subtraction first. So we have to put parentheses around that to force it to do that first. And if we add more decimal places, then we get the same answer that we did before. Okay. But we didn't do it that way, and they wanted to see the actual difference here, so I just said take that thing that we've already calculated and divide it by the old thing. So we didn't have to worry about order of precedence there because we did it in 2 different steps, which is what they wanted. Number 7 says switch to the stores worksheet, calculate the total sales, mean, median mode, and standard deviation for this data set. Label the cells so they can be easily identified. On the stores worksheet, I am going to freeze the top row because I like to see that, and then I'm going to control arrow down to get to the bottom of the list. Here is the data, the sales, and they want us to calculate in number 7 the total, the mean, the median, the mode, and the standard deviation. And of course, we're going to be referring to this same set of data the whole time. So the sum is equals sum of, and I'm going to say this number, control shift arrow up, then shift arrow down to get rid of the top one. And now, because we're going to be copying that formula down, but we want to refer to this everything the same, we're going to make that absolute. So we're always referring to that same data. When I press enter, it enters the formula's results and moves down a cell. Now I'm going to copy that formula down, and of course we get the same result every time because it's the same formula. But now I'm just going to change the name of the function. So instead of the sum, for the mean, that means the average, that's the mean. And then the median is spelled M-E-D-I-A-N. And the mode, there are several of them. We want mode single, and there's mode SNGL. And then we want the standard deviation, and typically we use the one that's a .s, stdev.s. Okay. And so there are the 4 functions that they wanted on the total, on the sales figures from last year. I'm assuming these are dollar sales, so I'm going to format this as currency, and that will give us 2 decimal places on it. So there are our total sales from last year, or whatever year this is. Now number 8 says, on the same worksheet, set up a table to analyze the change and percent change of each of these as compared with the historical values. Based on the changes, explain on the worksheet just below your analysis whether the stores are doing better this year and if sales in stores are more or less likely to vary from mean sales than they did last year. This is the current data, and they want us to compare it to the historical data. And the historical data, we don't have the totals, but we have the other 4, and that is on page 147 at the bottom. The mean historically is 8817. We got 8,000 for the median, 5,500, and standard deviation 2920. And those are all whole dollars, so I'll format as currency and knock it to 0 decimal places. So that's historical. Now they want us to calculate the difference and the percent difference. Remember, the difference is always the new thing minus the old thing. So here's the new thing minus the old thing. That's the actual difference in currency. And then we say, how significant is that? Well, we compare it to what it used to be. This thing divided by what it used to be. And then we copy those formulas down. Oh, it'd be good to make that a percent first, wouldn't it? Do we really want a whole percent? Let's give it a little more of a... Let's do that. I don't know what they want. Now they want us to make a comment. It says explain whether the stores are doing better this year. Okay, well here's the percent difference. And our mean is higher, our median is higher, our mode is higher. But notice the standard deviation has gotten way bigger. Our standard deviation last year was only 3,000 and now it's over 5,000. So we have a lot more variance. This is what the answer book said for their comment. Last but not least, we have number 9 on page 149. It says based on sales to all stores, and that's these store sales right here. Here's our total sales to all stores. Based on that, and the total gallons sold for the current quarter, which is back here on the flavor sheet. There's the total gallons sold for the current quarter right there. It says, what is the price of a gallon of ice cream on average? Now the price is going to be dollars per gallon, right? So our price is going to be dollars per gallon. I'll write that down here. Average price, which would be dollars per, and remember per means divided by, dollars per gallon. What we would want to do is say, just come over here and take dollars right here and divide it by gallons on the other page. I'm going to move this guy to this cell and right justify it. And that way it'll be right next to our dollars per gallon. So we want our total dollars for this year equals, here's the total dollars. and then we want to divide that by the total gallons. Now again, it doesn't matter whether the number we need is on this sheet or even in this workbook. We just go find it and click on it. So we're in the stores worksheet, we're in cell D212, we're writing a formula. It's wanting us to tell it what to divide by. So I'm going to say go to the flavor sheet, and it puts in the name of the sheet with an exclamation point after it. And then I click on this cell with the total gallons, and notice it says that's E26, and I finish the way I always finish any formula. I press the enter key, it will go back to the stores sheet, and it'll go down one cell from where the formula is. So I'm going to press the enter key. It entered the formula right there, and it moved down a cell. And we can say that on average this quarter we're getting gross sales of about $3.74 per gallon. Number 10 is just prettying up the worksheet. We're not going to do that. We will leave that as an exercise to the student.